So we're Doug and Polly White with White Sand Partners, dougandpolly.com. And if you caught this whole act back in September, I don't know if anybody was at the September. Yeah, we got a couple of people that were at the first chamber review that was back in September. We presented on the 3 questions every business person must be able to answer, but we only covered the first question. So what we're going to do is run through the extremely shortened version of the first question and get on to questions number 2 and 3 for tonight. So we'll get you caught up to date and then move forward with the topic for this evening.
So the first question that every business must answer
I'll just go right on through there.
is, why should a prospective customer buy your product or service rather than a competitor's? You've got to get crystal clear on that, and that sounds like a really simple thing, but it can be an incredibly complex and difficult thing to answer. Why should a prospective customer buy your product or service rather than competitors?
You know, we were talking about this we had just done a speech up in Northern Virginia, and I had a woman come up afterwards, and she said, okay, so what is this first question? And so I gave it to her, why should a competitor buy your product? Why should a prospective customer buy your product or service versus that of a competitor's? And she kind of looked at me and she went, you know, I don't know. She says, I'm a consultant and I work with a lot of folks, but I don't really know. And then she just looked at me and she said, maybe I shouldn't do this. And I went, well, you know, I don't mean to make you question the whole purpose of your business, but you do need to be able to explain that to a customer, because if you can't explain that to somebody, then your customers really aren't going to know what it is that you do. And it can't just be the first answer that comes to people's mind. And I bet some people already thought about it.
You know, the thing we hear people say so often is, well, our service is better. Okay, really? So your competitors have poor service? Or, you know, can your prospective customers see that your service is better before they make the buying decision? Because if they can't, that's not going to be very helpful. Now, you guys can relate, because this can be a differentiator, but you've got to make sure that you understand what services you're providing that others don't. And there's a good example here.
Right. The best example was our little local company that everybody remembers, a little grocery store called U-Crops. If you asked what differentiated U-Crops from that of the other grocery stores in the area, people would tell you they have better customer service. Their customers would tell you they have better customer service, and they'd explain it to you. You know, that they do things like walk your groceries out to your car and they put them in your car for you. They have people that do that. They won't let you touch a bag unless you say, no, I really want to take them. And they won't accept a tip.
And if you ask them, where's the mayonnaise? Instead of saying aisle 4 or halfway down, they would get up from whatever they were doing, walk over, probably pick up 2 jars of mayonnaise and say, this is what we've got, which would you like? I mean, it was just a very different level of service. And if you asked a U-Crops customer, what makes U-Crops different, they would explain that to you.
So we would say that if you're thinking about your business and saying, okay, what is it really that makes my business different than that of my competitors, then if you're going to use service, good customer service, our employees care more, any of those kinds of things that we hear a lot, then you better have some way that you're sure your customers would say that if they were asked about your business. Okay? What would your customers say? So what we say and what we talked about at last September was we really went over 4 low-cost models and 4 differentiated models for business strategy. And if you'd like to chat with us at some point about, because you missed those and you want to go back over those, we'd be glad to talk about that.
The bad news is this can be a really tough question to answer. The good news is there's only 2 answers. Mm-hmm. You're either going to compete on cost, you're going to be a low-cost provider, or you're going to have to find a way to differentiate your product or service, because you're going to be asking somebody to pay a premium. And you've got to justify that premium. The only way you can justify the premium is by being different on some dimension.
Right, most small businesses can't compete on cost. It's just the bottom line. You don't have the volume usually to be able to get a low enough price from your suppliers so that you can go with a lower cost model. So most small businesses do compete on a differentiated model. It's figuring out, how am I different? It goes back to that first question. What makes me different than my competitor? Why should somebody buy my stuff versus the guy down the street? All right? So we're going to speed right along to really the meat of today, which is questions 2 and 3.
So we're going to assume that you've already thought about it, you figured out what makes you different than your competition, you understand how you differentiate yourself. That's great. That's the first step. But now the second question is there a segment of the market that values that thing that makes you different? And is it large enough to support your business? Because you can be different.
Yes, in fact, what we're going into now is what most people talk about as market segmentation, right? So the first thing Doug was saying was you can be different. So for instance, one of the silly examples that we use is you could manufacture and try and sell a skunk-flavored popsicle.
And if you did, you would be different. There is
Yes.
nothing like that on the shelves at your grocery store. But then you have to ask the second question, which is there a segment of the market that values that difference? And is it large enough to support your business?
And I would suggest to you that there is not a large enough segment of the population that would really be interested in purchasing skunk-flavored popsicles, except for maybe a very small group, the 7 and 8-year-old boy market. That group right there might be interested in skunk-flavored popsicles, but it's a very small segment of the market.
It really is. I think it'd be tough to build a business on.
Right. So we would like to walk you through really a case study. And this is Weidmuller. That's the way you say that. And Weidmuller is a company that Doug and I worked with years ago. And it's one of the best examples of market segmentation out there.
Weidmuller US was about $35 million in revenue, and they wanted to grow sales. That was the challenge. How can we grow this business? Because I'll give you a little backstory. Weidmuller's market share in the US was about 10%. Against the exact same set of competitors in Europe, their market share was 50%. It was obvious that they had a product line that would support a much larger share of the market. So they decided, we really want to grow this US operation. We want to grow it significantly, and therefore what we're going to do is we're going to segment the market.
Right. So they decided to segment the market, and they went after this in a way that probably on the surface made sense. They said, well, we'll segment the market by industry. Now, follow along, this will all make sense here. So they started saying, well, let's go out and say we're going to market our products to the chemical industry and the machine
We're
tools.
going to market to machine tools, and we're going to market to automotive, and we're going to market to packaged goods. So they took the market and they broke it up by industry, which is sometimes a really useful way to segment the market.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they did.
Right, and it didn't work. And it didn't work for a very good reason. And that is because each of these segments of the market made the buying decision in exactly the same way.
You see, what these products did is they connected wires together. And it turns out, if you're connecting wires together, doesn't matter if you're in a chemical plant or a packaged goods plant or an automotive plant, you're still connecting two wires together.
Right.
And so we started thinking about what is it that makes a good market segmentation? One that will work. This one didn't work.
Right.
But what is it that makes a good market segmentation? And we came up with this as the first premise.
Right. So now, hang with us on this. What makes a good market segmentation is that the members of the segment must make the buying decisions like each other and different from those who are not in the segment. So it's really all about the buying decision. The people in the segment are going to make the buying decision like each other and differently than those who are not in the segment.
And so therefore what you have to do is understand how customers make the buying decision.
Right. Let's use another local example, because Weidmuller, their U.S. offices are local here too. But Manchester Industries, not too far away from here at all, it's a paper converter.
And that's really just a fancy word for they take big rolls of paper and they slice them into sizes you can actually use.
Right.
That's what a paper converter does. They convert big rolls of paper into small pieces of paper. And their president came up with a way of segmenting market.
Right. So he said, I realize that there is a segment of the market that makes the buying decision based on delivery time. What is really important to this group of customers is, can I get my paper fast?
The CEO's name was Ken Aspinall, and Ken explained he figured out that there was a certain group of customers that if you could get the order to me by tomorrow, the order was yours.
So he went out and he changed all of his processes in his plant so that if you ordered something today and you were east of the Mississippi, you could have your paper tomorrow. And he suddenly, his company just took off. It was so successful because he figured out how a segment of the market makes the buying decision based on delivery time. Let's use another example.
We'll take the automotive industry, because that's one that you can all relate to. And we're going to segment the automotive industry into 3 really simple segments. And this is admittedly oversimplified. But let's talk about the price-sensitive segment. So these are folks that are looking for basic transportation.
Right.
They're just trying to get from one place to the other. The performance segment. These folks want a hot car that's got some power and handling. And the transport. These are people that have kids to carry. Okay, they've got to transport kids and paraphernalia.
Right. Now, do you think that the people in these different segments are making the buying decision on different criteria? Probably a lot of them. I mean, the people who want to haul a bunch of kids and hockey equipment and the Little League team and everything else, or, you know, maybe they've got their bikes that they want to haul in the back, whatever it is, they are not price-sensitive folks for the most part. They are not worried about the price of gas as much. They're worried about how much capacity do I have in my vehicle. So you would be able to market to these segments very differently.
And they're sure not interested in a 2-seater sports car.
No.
Right?
No.
That's just not what will get it done for them.
So you would market to these groups in very different ways. Start thinking about it. It's because they're making the buying decision differently. Right? Okay. So that's the first thing.
And that brings us to the second condition for good segmentation. So the first condition is people in the segment make the buying decision like each other and differently from those not in the segment. Second condition is they have to be externally identifiable or willing to self-identify. Externally identifiable because if you can identify who they are, you can reach out and touch them with your marketing message.
Right. Or if they're willing to self-identify, then you have to become easy to find. So let's do that again. So externally identifiable is outbound marketing. You can figure out who is in your segment. You know where they live. You know where they shop. You know what magazines they read. It's outbound marketing. So it's magazines. The people who want a sports car or a performance car are reading probably something like Car and Driver.
So if you wanted to reach out and touch that segment, you could advertise there. On the other hand, in the transport segment, you might be better off advertising in Better Homes and Gardens. You may find more folks that are interested in what makes your offering different there in that magazine. So these segments are to at least some extent externally identifiable because you know which magazines they read, so you can reach out and touch them.
Now that's the opposite of willing to self-identify. People who are willing to self-identify are coming to look for you. They know that they want a performance car, and so if you wanted to find the latest, greatest performance car out there, where would you go? What would you do first? I know what I would do.
Google it.
Google it. Yeah. You go out there, maybe you want to go look at the Mercedes website and take a look at it, or you Google, performance cars, 2013. right? Sports cars 2013 to get some information on it. Then if people are going to come to you, you have to make yourself very easy to find.
So that brings to things like search engine optimization. You need to understand which words bring you to the top. So we'll use an example here of First Mortgages. So some years ago, we worked at Capital One. And Capital One is a direct mail company. That's how they market. That's their way of marketing their products. And they had put together a little group to direct mail market First Mortgages. Anybody see any issues with that?
So, if you start thinking about if you are going to be doing direct mail, so is that inbound or outbound marketing?
Outbound.
Outbound.
Really outbound.
Okay, you're right. So now, do we know who we should mail these pieces to if we're looking at somebody who's getting a first mortgage?
Well, yes,
You
except
might.
only a small portion of the population at any time is actually looking for a first mortgage,
Right.
right? Because people who are looking for first mortgages are people who are buying houses. So if you had a way to identify who was buying a house, you might be able to target those folks with direct mail. But they were unable to identify externally who was it that was looking for a first mortgage. So they were spending lots and lots of money sending mail out. 99% of the pieces of mail that got sent out were completely irrelevant to the people they were sending them to. Then they had to, and therefore the response rates were so low that they were losing an awful lot of money. And we actually came along and said, first mortgages have this inherent problem if you're going to try to market them through direct mail. Really tough to know where to send the mail. But if we look at the second mortgages, and depending on the particular state of the economy, refis, we can do some things to identify who might be interested in those products. Because we can go to credit bureaus, we can figure out who has got some equity in their home. So a second mortgage might be a good thing to be mailing to somebody who's got some equity in their home. Or you can back into and do some approximations and figure out approximately what kind of interest rate people are paying. And if you can get a handle on that, and if nothing else by looking at the age of the loan, you know what interest rates were, and if they've fallen since then you can direct mail refi offers to those folks. And all of a sudden, when we started doing that, response rates increased pretty significantly.
Right. Long story short, Capital One pretty much got out of the first mortgage business and went into the second mortgage business because they knew how to do direct mail, and so they were matching up what they knew how to do with what would work. Okay?
And the other brilliant thing was we immediately sold the loans to Countrywide, so we had no credit risk, and when the market tanked, we were in good shape.
Okay, there you go for Capital One story. Okay, but back to Weidmuller now. This is this non-sexy industrial product. I mean, it really is a piece of plastic with a couple of screws and clamps in it where you put wires in each side and the wires are not connected. It's really not a good thing.
So we explained that the first attempt at market segmentation just didn't work at all.
Right.
Completely fell apart. So we scratched our heads and said, okay, let's try and figure out how customers make the buying decision. And let's begin by asking folks internally, because surely we'll find some people that know.
Right, so we asked the engineers, how do our customers make the buying decision? Because when you want to know something, go ask them, right? So the engineers said, oh, it's all the really whippy features that are associated with our terminal blocks, is what they're called, terminal blocks. And it's like it's harder to pull out our wires once they're screwed in, and our plastic, you need to heat it up even higher to make it melt. And so they said that's what really the customers care about.
The engineers were pretty sure that it was all the technical features that was how customers made the buying decision. And then we went and talked to the sales department.
And what do salesmen say is always the critical aspect as to how customers make the buying decision? Price, exactly.
I've talked to lots of sales forces, and I've not heard anything other. Well, I do hear things other than that, but that is always a consistent part of the message. It's about price.
It is about price, and that's what the sales force told us. It's about price. So we said, okay, wait a minute. We got to figure out, first of all, do we know who is making the buying decision at these companies that buy our product? So we went to a different thing. We went and talked to the design engineers at the customer.
So there are two segments we're going to define here. I want to try to explain this because I want it to be clear. The multiple supplier segment and the single supplier segment. So in the multiple supplier segment, the design engineers would specify multiple suppliers. They would give you a part number for Weidmuller and a part number for Phoenix Contact.
Which was a competitor.
Which was a competitor, and a part number for Entrelec, which was another competitor. So they might specify 3 different manufacturers, the multiple supplier segment.
Right. In that segment, since the design engineer was specifying that, in other words, you can buy any one of those, we don't care. They'll all work. So that left it up to the purchasing agent then to choose whichever supplier had the lowest price, right?
And that, the purchasing agent would put it out to bid to those 3 suppliers, and the one that came back with the lowest price won. So the sales force was right for that segment of the market. For the multiple supplier segment, it was about price. You had to be one of those 3, so you had to be specified. It was sort of a 2-step process. But once you got specified, then you had to have the low price. But there were also an awful lot of engineers that did not specify multiple suppliers. They specified only one supplier. And when they did that, the purchasing agent would buy from that company. Now, they could go back and try to get another product approved by engineering, but that was a lot of hassle. They weren't going to do it. So in the single supplier segment, in effect, the design engineer was making the buying decision.
Right. And the design engineer was not concerned about price. I mean, one of the things you have to know about this little piece of plastic that we were selling at Weidmuller is it cost about $1. Now, they used a whole bunch of them, which is why the company was $35 million of annual revenue. So we sold a whole bunch of these dollar products. But it only cost $1. Now, if you're putting together a big chemical plant, the one thing you know as a design engineer is you don't want this little piece of plastic making your multi-million dollar chemical plant fail. Right? So you better do a good job of specifying.
You're also not really concerned about price, right? Because the thing is, these products represent about 1% of the cost of this project that this engineer is designing. And even if you have a 10% difference in price relative to a competitor, which would be a huge amount from the supplier's perspective, it is absolutely rounding error for this engineer. So these engineers truly did not care about price. They also didn't care much about product features. Now, we went and talked to them and interviewed some of them and said, well, how about the force it takes to put it? And finally said, time out, guys, look. I'm trying to hook 2 wires together. Okay? Your product does that just fine. But so does Phoenix, and so does Entrelec, and so does Beeland, and so does Vago, and so does about 7 other companies that sell these things.
Yeah.
We're just hooking wires together. So they did not care about price, and they did not care about product features. Now, let me caveat. If you said to the engineer, do you care about price, they would say yes. Because, of course, you can't admit that you don't care about price, but in fact, they did not.
No. What they were concerned about is really 2 things. One, that they've specified the right product, because you're hooking together these wires. It's important that the big automotive plant or the chemical plant actually work when you get everything hooked together. And the second thing they cared about is, I want to be able to do this quickly with the least amount of hassle. Okay? That was it.
Those were the 2 things they cared about. They would in effect, follow the path of least resistance. It was at this point that we had the revelation that essentially every industrial catalog in the U.S. is exactly backward. Now, why would we say that? The thing about an industrial catalog is if you know the part number, you can go to the back in the index, you can look up the part number, it'll tell you which page that part is on, you can go to that page, and you can find the specifications.
Right.
But what does this design engineer know? He or she does not know the part number. They know the specifications. They want to find out the part number. And the only way you can do that using a typical industrial catalog is trial and error. You just start, you can get to the right general section and you start reading to find the one that matches what you're looking for.
Right, and remember what these design engineers were concerned about was 1, that they pick the right part, so it has to work, and number 2, that I can do it with the least amount of hassle. So fast and accurate is what they wanted. So at this point, what we knew is as long as you were the specifier, the specified product, the design engineer knew your catalog, you were going to get specified every time because they were going to learn one catalog and one catalog only and use it over and over again.
And they did this because it made their life simple. They could do it quickly, get the right product, and move on. I mean, I'll tell you, I was a design engineer in a former life. I designed heating and air conditioning systems. I designed around Carrier, not Trane, not York, not anybody else, Carrier. Why? Because that was what the boss designed around, and that's what he taught me. I understood the Carrier catalog. I knew how to find the right product in that catalog. And if somebody else wanted to come back to me and prove that the Trane or the York was equivalent, sure, I'd be willing to look at it, but they were going to have to jump through a lot of hoops to get me to say okay to that. You follow the path of least resistance, you do the thing that's easiest. Now that is great if you're the company that's got a 50% market share. The status quo is maintained. But if you're the company that's got a 10% market share that wants to grow it dramatically,
Right.
that's a big problem.
Yeah, we couldn't get in. Frankly, we just couldn't break through. So that is when this knowledge of market segmentation and how our customer made the buying decision. Remember, we figured it out because we asked what was important to them, how did they make the buying decision. We had identified this little group called the that's what we named it, the single supplier segment. And we said, what if we could become the easiest company for them to specify? Would they start specifying us instead of the other guys?
So we went through a process. We developed a piece of software that essentially allowed the engineer to give the specifications. Now we did that by asking 5 questions. It took us a while to figure out what the right 5 questions were, but you answer these 5 questions, we'll spit out a part number. We'll tell you the part number that will in fact meet your needs. Alternatively, if you happen to know a competitor's part number, great, give us that. We'll tell you which Weidmuller part number will do the job for them. So we made it very, very easy to specify the part number, to know it was the right part number, and to do it very quickly. Then we took it one step further.
Then, once you put all the little part numbers together, then it actually would produce an AutoCAD drawing. It was an industrial drawing. Now, this today sounds like, oh, well, that's not that big a deal. But basically, we designed an app back in the 90s before it was cool to design apps. So we designed this little piece of software, and it completely changed the way business was done in our industry.
We made it uploadable to AutoCAD, so the engineers, now they had a reason to design around Weidmuller, which was if I design around Weidmuller, I get my drawings done for free. So we actually fundamentally changed the basis of competition. It was no longer about product features or about price. It was about we're the easiest to design, to specify. You know you'll get the right thing, you know you'll get it quickly, and if you do that, you'll get your drawings done for you.
Right.
That can be uploaded to AutoCAD.
So what we found was a segment of the market that made the buying decision differently than other segments, and they made it like each other. They were a segment that wanted to be able to accurately and quickly specify the product.
And they didn't care too much about price, they didn't care too much about product features.
Right.
That was a good thing. So now what we did was tailor our product service offering to that segment by developing this piece of software.
Right. So if we now know how they make a buying decision. They make it like each other and differently than the other people that are not in the segment. So the next question is,
are they externally identifiable? And the answer is unfortunately not. You can't look at a list of companies' names in an industrial roster and tell which ones are single supplier and which ones are multi-supplier. However, we did have an advantage.
right, we had distributors throughout the whole country, hundreds of people that knew all of these folks. And they knew whether they were, once we explained, this is what a multiple supplier segment, and this is the single supplier segment, this is what they look like. Once we explained it to the distributors, they knew what to look for, and they told us who was in which segment.
And we said, we will give this software. Back then it was on a floppy disk, back when floppy disks really were floppy.
This is really old, right?
We will come install this on your computer. All you have to do is register with us so we can provide you the updates. Now there were two reasons for registering. One is, yes, we wanted updates. Two is we were creating a list of all the single supplier segment members that nobody else had. So we ended up with the best of both worlds. They were identifiable to us, they weren't identifiable to the competition.
So let's just tell you what the results were. In the next couple of years, sales of Weidmuller products increased it just skyrocketed. This was one of the most fun I ever had in business, was those 3 years we were working on this.
Price pressure declined because we were targeting a segment that wasn't particularly price sensitive. Now, you couldn't double or triple your price, but you could go up by 5%, which is huge. When you're making a 20 or 25% margin, to be able to increase price by 5%, it falls straight to the bottom line.
Right, well, the profit soared, and the bottom line is, in 2 years, we made more money in that company than the 19 years combined that they had been in business in the U.S. before. It was so much fun. And we actually went back then and started working with the employees with this new theme. We had decided what's going to differentiate us in the marketplace. We are going to be the easiest company with which to do business, period. And so we talked to our warehousing people, we talked to our customer service people, and we changed every single thing we did to fit this new brand we had for Weidmuller, which is we are the easiest company in this industry to do business with. It was a great story. Okay, so that's question number 2. Is there a segment of the market that would value what differentiates you from your competitors, and is that segment large enough to support your business? Remember, you can't just market skunk-flavored popsicles. You got to have a big enough segment. But it doesn't matter whether you're designing weddings or selling consulting services or making brownies. It doesn't matter. You need to be able to figure out, what does my ideal client look like? How do they make that buying decision? So how can I tailor my product service package to them? It's the monopoly.
You know, it's been said that the job of the strategist is to create a little monopoly, to identify a piece of the market that so values the thing that you have to offer, the thing that differentiates you, that the competition really isn't a serious consideration. Because you've managed to find a way to position your product or service much closer to what it is that the customer is looking for, and therefore the competition just melts away.
One of the issues that small business people have a lot, at least in our experience with working with them, is they want to be all things to all people, especially when they're getting started, right? Can't turn down a sale, don't have that many of them. So I will do whatever to sell whatever to anybody. And sometimes that isn't the best thing to be doing.
We'd suggest that what you ought to do is figure out what your target market is, what segment you're going to go after, and figure out how to tailor your product or service specifically for their needs.
Right. You'll find that it generates more sales in the long run. All right. So let's go, as I said, the first and second questions, what differentiates me and who should I be selling it to? What segment of the market works for me? You can do those aspirationally. So even if it isn't you right now.
It may not be you right now. In fact, at Weidmuller, when we first figured out that what we wanted to do was become the easiest in the industry to do business with, we weren't. There was nothing that made us easier to do business with than our competition. But we set that as a goal, and we changed our product service offering so that we became easier to do business with. So at least initially, when you're doing this, it can be aspirational. It can be the direction you want to move your company.
So if you have a segment of the market that you want to serve, maybe you're not serving them right now, you can look at this and go, what could we do? What could we change? What could we become that would make us stand out for that segment of the market? And go after it that way. Okay, so the third question, so after you've answered the second question and you now know what differentiates you and who your market is, you have to get your message to your market.
So the question is, how can you reach that target market segment? How can you reach them with your message?
Right. And we often say, we grew up hearing the old adage, anybody else heard this one? If you build a better mousetrap, the world will beat a path to your door.
There's only one problem. It's a lie!
Yeah, it absolutely
Okay, if
is.
the world does not know that you have a better mousetrap, nobody is going to be knocking on your door.
Right.
You've got to reach the market with your message.
Okay, so what is the best kind of marketing to use, especially in the small business?
It's the kind that generates sales.
Yes. And it sounds so stupid stupid to say that, so simplistic, but yet we see small business owners throwing lots of marketing dollars into the big black hole all the time because they haven't done the homework at the front end to figure out what makes me different, who am I trying to serve, because those two questions have to be answered before you can say, and then how am I going to get my message out there to people?
It's particularly true with social media marketing and internet marketing. People forget the fundamentals. They forget the marketing 101, the things that we've been talking about, and they just say, I got to have a website. You know, we're gonna do SEO. We're gonna go build a Facebook page. In fact, we are aware of a company that is in the cleaning business.
Oh, okay.
They sell mostly to the government.
Yes.
And a marketing firm came along and said, you got to launch a social media marketing campaign.
Right. Think about their business. What is their target market segment? It's government procurement contracts. How many government procurement officers are out there scouring Facebook and Twitter to find people to bid on their contracts? Zero. But yet this company got caught up in the, oh, you've got to do all of this stuff. It works great if you have a plan, and if that plan works for your business. It doesn't work for every business.
No, I mean, if your target market is septuagenarians, we're going to suggest to you that Twitter may not be the place for you.
Right.
Okay? You've got to make sure that you're going after, and it's funny, but we see small businesses time and time again throw money into this black hole called marketing with absolutely no result because they haven't taken the time to answer these questions.
All right, so we have 6 questions that we say that you should ask, and we're going to go through these for you. So first of all, what is the short-term goal of your marketing campaign? All right, what's the short-term goal? And what, it can be, the long-term goal we know is what? Sales, right, revenue, absolutely. But you can have some short-term goals.
You could have a short-term goal is to build brand awareness. We want people to know exactly who we are. I can tell you, the first time I met Nigel Morris, who was the president and chief operating officer of Capital One, he was interviewing me. And we went through the interview, and we got to that part of the interview where he says, okay, so do you have any questions for me? Well, I did, because I thought of these ahead of time, because I know you're supposed to have questions if you're going to be interviewed. And so I said, so what is the biggest challenge facing Capital One? And he said, we've got to build a brand. We have been riding on the Visa and MasterCard brand. Nobody knows who Capital One is.
Back then they did.
Back then they didn't. This would have been 1999. And we're reaching the limit of what we can do without building our own brand. So Nigel, for the next several years, was focused on building brand awareness, but not just in a random haphazard way. So I was blown away when I saw this research, because we started spending, shortly after I joined the company, $100 million a year on television advertising. And I thought, oh my word, are we getting any kind of return on this? And then I saw the analysis. There were certain markets, they call them black markets, that they had not put television ads into. So places like Peoria, and I don't know if Peoria was one of them, but
We'll just use it.
We'll just use Peoria. Okay, and so what they did was they knew when they mailed into those markets what the response rates had been prior to the campaign. They looked at how the response rates changed after the campaign, and they were able to show that the markets that they had run the advertising in had significantly higher response rates. And for that $100 million that Capital One was spending, I think the numbers were 200, 300, 400 that they were making. So they were able to target, this building brand awareness ultimately led to sales, but the initial goal was we got to build brand awareness. Now they also didn't do it in a random way, they did it in a very targeted and focused way, and they made sure to measure.
Right. Okay, number 2, what is your campaign's direction? Remember that inbound and outbound? So if we're going outbound, we know who the person is, the customer is, we know where they live, we know what they read, what they buy, whatever, and we're going out to them. So direct mail, print advertising, radio, television, those are all examples of outbound. Now inbound, when they're going to look to buy, they're coming to find you. So that's things like SEO, Yellow Pages, although, did you see the news today? Yellow Pages is bankruptcy. That's not surprising. But also things like maybe trade shows. You know, people are self-identifying. I am interested in buying a boat. I'm going to a boat show. Okay? You have to be easy to find. You have to be at the boat show, right? Okay. All right. Then the next one.
So, what's the cost of your campaign versus the value? You've got to understand the economics. So, what kind, if you're doing direct mail, what kind of response rate will you need to see in order to make this a profitable campaign? If you're advertising in a magazine, whatever you're spending money on, what kind of response are you going to have to see to break even? And is it reasonable to believe that you're going to be able to do that?
Right. And what we say here, and the reason we have these as an example is, Doug occasionally, or he used to at least, get these catalogs that had wine, very expensive wine in it, that were going to be sold at auction. Sometimes these came in a hardbound book. Same thing with the jewelry. One time, they didn't know their market, but one time I got this book that I think the cheapest piece of jewelry in there was like $30,000. You don't, and it was a hardbound book that I got in the mail with all this expensive jewelry. I had a really good time looking at it. I don't think they understood their market with me. I must have gotten on some list somewhere.
But the fact is, they could have a pretty low response rate. If anybody actually bought jewelry, that marketing campaign was worth the cost.
Right. So if you're not selling a very high-priced product, it's different than if you're selling something that's very expensive. And then you have to understand your response rates.
And very expensive and with large margins.
Right. Exactly. What's the length of the impression versus the duration of the message? So if you're going to put something in the Richmond Times-Dispatch to advertise it, how long, do people keep their paper around and read it? If they read it at all. One day, that's it. You don't go back and search through old copies of newspapers, but people will reread magazines for months. There's a longer duration that you get out of something like that.
So our example here is billboards.
Mm-hmm.
If you're trying to market a single-family home, one house, taking out a 6-month ad on a billboard is probably not a great idea. First of all, it's probably too expensive. Secondly, it's going to be up there for 6 months. Hopefully that house sells a whole lot sooner than 6 months. Now, if you're talking about a planned community where you've got hundreds of homes to sell, that might be a great way to market it because you're going to be selling those for a whole lot more than 6 months. So make sure that the duration of your impression matches the duration of what you've got to sell.
Right. Okay. Does that make sense? Next one. Where are the members of your target market segment? I mean, you've got to know what they read, what they watch. Do they read the newspaper? Do they prefer to read Work at Richmond? I'll just put a plug in, right? Okay.
Yeah. Well, we talked about the septuagenarians and Twitter. Probably not a great match.
No. It's not that older people aren't on Twitter, but they're less likely to be on Twitter than a 20-year-old. So, Twitter might work for something if you're going after a younger audience. Same thing in reverse. If you want to, get to 6-year-old girls, you're probably not going to want to advertise in Vogue magazine. It just doesn't make any sense at all. Know where your market is and where they live.
How complex is your message? So a more complex message is going to take you longer to explain. You may need a page of print ad. You may need an infomercial rather than a 15-second radio spot. So make sure that you match the complexity of the message to the media.
Right, and 140 characters on Twitter, direct mail, and I love the quote.
So one of our favorite Albert Einstein quotes is, "Things should be made as simple as possible, but no simpler." There are some messages you just can't condense into 140 characters.
Okay. So there are the 6 questions again. What are the short-term goals? The direction of your campaign. Economics of the campaign, do they work for you?
Does the length of the medium match the duration of your product or service? Will you reach your target market segment?
And is the complexity of your message consistent with the media that you're choosing? I mean, we find that all the time. We're big Twitter people. That's what we did. We're huge Twitter people. And we'll hit it tomorrow.
Okay.
40,000 followers tomorrow.
And that's after she's already thrown out all the Russian women that want to be my wife.
Absolutely. And all the robots and the spam bots and everything else. And we've built that Twitter following in just under a year. So 40,000 Twitter followers in a year. And we boosted our hits to our website from less than 50 a week to about 600 plus a week now. And we know that the people who are coming to visit us are small business people because that's who's on our Twitter feed. But we have content that we have articles that we put out there for people to read about small business. The same kinds of things that we talk about here and the articles that we have in Work at Richmond, we put those out on Twitter and use those as ways to get people to come to our website. Twitter is how we bring people to our website. We don't tweet just to tweet. We tweet because there's a plan. The plan is, please come and visit our website and read what we have to say. And the plan there is that we have other things that we want you to do once you get to the website. It all has to be connected. You have to think about who's my market, how do I get them, how am I going to reach them with my message, what's going to draw them in, what's the plan once I get them. Okay? All right, so putting it all together.
Okay, so to start with, you know what your message is. Because your message is that thing that makes you different from your competition. It's the reason that people would want to buy your product or service.
Right. And then you have to know who you want in that market segment. Who is your product service package going to be just right for? Or if it isn't, how do I have to change my product service package so it serves one segment of the market really, really well?
And how are we going to reach them? We're going to have an outbound campaign, or we're going to make ourselves easy to find. If we're going to go outbound, what's the right medium?
Right. So once you get all of that together, then you have to craft this message that's clear, convincing, and attention grabbing, right? And there are lots and lots of ad and marketing firms that want to help you with that, believe me. Just make sure you've got one that actually is going to measure what they're doing.
That's right.
Ask the right questions.
Ask the right questions and make sure, trust me folks, you have got to be responsible for crafting your marketing plan. We have run into lots and lots of marketing firms that what they have is a hammer, and so everything's a nail. Whatever it is they do, that's what you need, regardless of whether it's what you really need or not. So put together your plan. Once you've done that, by all means go engage somebody who can help you do a good job.
Right, somebody who is going to partner with you strategically. But no, just understanding what we talked about this evening, these 3 questions, will help you to work with your marketing firm in a much better way. So last thing here, this is what we say.
Fail fast, fail cheap. So the point is, not everything you try is going to work the first time.
Right.
Find a way to test and learn. Fail fast, but fail cheap.
Right, and just don't fail because you're cheap. As Doug says, test and learn. Not every message is going to work. A lot of people put a message out there, they look at the response rate, and then they go, well, that didn't have as big a response rate as I wanted, so I'm going to go with something else. And then you change it and try it again. All right, any questions? Because I know this was market segmentation is a pretty complex subject. So we tried to break it down for you, but we're happy to take any questions you have. Any questions? Oh, good. From my marketing guy.
In your, was it Weissmuller or?
Weidmuller.
Yeah.
Why was their European market share so much greater than the U.S.?
Because they had done a much better job of marketing in Europe. It turns out that all of the competitors in this industry were European.
Okay.
Weidmuller was actually the first one to develop these terminal blocks. And so they built a much better market share there.
They were first to enter.
They were the first to enter. They had really good products, and they did a much better job of marketing in Europe. They then sent a couple of German, and by the way, they understood the culture in Germany. They got it. They knew how to market there. When they went to the UK, they hired Europeans. They hired folks from the UK. When they went to Italy, they hired folks from Italy who understood the local markets. They did a much better job of marketing there because they had people who understood the local markets. When they came to the US, they sent a German over here. Great guy.
Yes, he is.
But We will do things this way.
Right, and he did too.
I mean, in fact, one of the great quotes that I got was, I remember going to one of the fellows in Germany and saying, this product that our competitors have is selling $1 million a year. We need this product. His response was, you don't need it. Well, he says, because you can do this and this and that and this and that, and you don't need that product. I said, but the customers want that product. He says, you must educate the customers. And my point is, they didn't understand the American market. They didn't understand what the American market was looking for. They weren't necessarily ready to design something specifically for the American market. In fact, I'll just shift off of this because it's a classic example of Germans thinking about the American market. So for years, BMWs did not have cup holders. Now, let's think about this for a second. If you were driving on the Autobahn at 200 miles an hour, do you think you were going to have a cup of hot coffee in your hand? No, trust me, your attention is focused. In the U.S., we like to drink coffee during our commutes.
Because sometimes we're going 3 miles an hour.
The way that Germany got convinced to design cup holders in is the senior folks from Germany came to visit their U.S. operation. They went through McDonald's, got 4 hot cups of coffee and handed it to the guys whose hands were burning, and they began to think that cup holders might be a better idea.
Yes, then we got cup holders in
So
the US.
so the truth of the matter is, they just didn't have folks here that were sensitive to the U.S. market. They didn't understand how customers here made the buying decision.
You know, and so I go back to the easy points of this, which is, you think you know what your customers want. Do you? It's sometimes really great to go out and ask your customers, what is it that's important to them? Why did they choose you versus somebody else? They'll tell you. If you ask the right questions, they'll tell you. And from that, you can figure out how to get more customers, especially that look like you're good ones.
Save the one issue that you have to be aware of, which is no customer is ever going to say that price is not really important. Everybody wants a lower price. And so if you go out and say, so would a lower price be a good thing? Of course, everybody's going to say that. You have to actually analyze the situation to understand whether it's really matters.
Right. Any other questions? Yes.
You haven't mentioned word of mouth marketing. Does this fit
Referrals?
anywhere?
Referrals are great, and if you can help to generate more referrals, that's a good thing. There's other ways of getting word of mouth.
So what I would say to you is absolutely word of mouth is critically important in a lot of industries. Now, you actually do have to have some clients that can talk about your service, so you got to get started. But that's one of the reasons that we believe it is absolutely critical to make sure that your customers have a good experience. That may mean that sometimes on certain deals you end up losing money. You know, certainly in our industry, I would rather lose money than to have an unhappy client.
Right, because that word of mouth marketing is important. It's also, you know, people have to be aware that you're around. So how do you build that brand? We actually have an article in our, at our website that talks about how to get some publicity for how to use social media, some of the free things that are out there to help generate that awareness of you. And then with a couple of good customer quotes here and there, that can really help to generate that.
In fact, I'll tell you, in my experience, one of the absolute critical times in a relationship with a customer is when there's been a problem.
Yeah.
If you resolve that problem immediately, you jump on it, you compensate them, you make them feel that they've been taken care of, you may end up with a customer that was more loyal than if you never had the problem to begin with. I'm not suggesting it's a good thing to have problems with customers. What I'm saying is it happens in every industry. When it does happen, it's actually an opportunity to build a solid relationship if you react correctly.
We actually had one friend who's a consultant also, he's up in the Delaware area, and he has an amusing thing that he puts on each of his invoices, which is he gives them, here's your bill for the month for the job that I did, plus 2 referrals. And he's serious. He tells them at the startup that part of the fee is 2 referrals. He's been successful with it. I haven't tried it, but I'm telling you, Alan has been successful with it. And then he puts it on their bill, and he'll call them and say, what are my 2 referrals? I need 2 good qualified referrals from you. That's part of what I'm charging.
I guess you get approval up front.
Yeah, yeah.
Surprises.
Surprises are not
Surprises
good.
are not good.
No,
Taking
but he-
surprises on invoices.
But he tells them up front, but then he puts it on his bill so they know how serious he was when he goes to collect his bill. Alan's been doing consulting work for the past 20 years and has been 20, 25 years maybe even, and has built quite a nice practice. And that is one of his techniques. I always thought that was an amusing one. All right, anything else? Yes, Keith.
I don't know how exactly it's related to what you're talking about, but a question that vexes me, being a small business and seeing a lot of small business, is knowing when to quit. Okay, and I'll give you an example. There's a building at 25th and Franklin, and I have seen 4 or 5 gift shops in that same place over the past 10 or so years, and they'll come and they'll be there for a year or 6 months, and up to the day before you close, you'll ask how it's going, and they'll say great, and then they're gone. And so so you see these businesses get in this situation. When do you say, okay, what I'm looking at now, the segment that I'm looking at now is not working? When do I say, maybe not close the business, but do something different to try to keep it going and persevere or stop?
So I think you touched on a really important point. When what you're doing is not working, and regardless of what you say to people, I mean,
Yeah.
if I'm running a retail store and somebody comes in and says, how's it going? I'm not going to say,
Haven't
"It's
made a
terrible."
sale all
Of
day.
course, you're going to say things are going good, you're going to put a happy face on it. But you got to face the hard facts. You got to be honest with yourself. And if what you're doing is not working, then you got to do something different. You got to figure out what is it that I'm going to change to try to make it work. And and at some point you do have to close the doors. I understand that. And it may be that 5th person should have looked at the first 4 that were in there and said, hey, this may not be the best location for this. Or at a very bare minimum, need to be able to say, I know why these first 4 people failed. They failed because they didn't do this, and I am going to do that. You got to figure out what's different. So by all means, yes, you do have to at some point cut your losses. You have to look at the situation, but I think at every point you've got to have a plan that in your mind leads to success. It can't just be doing more of the same thing. You can't do the same thing and expect different results.
Right, that old insanity quote. Right. But I think one of the things about entrepreneurs in general, small business people, is that they're naturally optimistic. I think they will try harder, longer than the average Joe. Because there is something about being an entrepreneur that if you don't have that optimism, you wouldn't go into business in the first place. You believe what you're going to do is going to succeed. So I think that we have seen some entrepreneurs along the way. Well, I'll give you an example of me. When I first got into consulting years ago, decided to quit my full-time job, and I was going to go in and become an HR consultant. And I went to talk to my employment law professor at GW. And I told him about this great consulting practice that I was going to have, that I was going to go in and do HR audits for small business people because they really needed the services of a very high-powered, successful, well-educated HR person to help them because they didn't have that. They couldn't afford one full-time. And he said it won't work. And I sat there and said, no, it will, because they need you and they don't have you, and you could save them all this money and save them from getting lawsuits. And he kept saying, this is not going to work. And finally he stopped me and he said, do you want my opinion, or do you want me just to agree with you that your idea is going to work? And that kind of stopped me in my tracks. And I went, okay, let me hear what he said. I'm an attorney. You're not. I've been teaching HR law for years, and I've tried to develop that same practice for small businesses, and it doesn't work because they don't want to know. They don't want to know what they're doing wrong, because then they might have to correct it. You're not going to be able to make a living doing that, and he is right. My first 4 years, I did one HR audit for a small business. I made a practice doing something completely different. But I could not sell an HR audit to a small business because they did not want to know. All right? Sometimes I was so optimistic and passionate about my idea, and it did not work. Now, I'm not saying it wouldn't work with a different person, maybe a different sales tax. Did not work for me or for this guy. All right? Should we get a glass of wine?
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, see, I look for the red in the face. That means I've done it well.
Everyone, the chambers, Rob Anderson. I do not have a big girl voice, but Rob does. So, thank you. Rob has. Our microphones are not working this evening, so we appreciate it if you could bear with us on the sound. But we're going to walk around and make this more interactive than anything else. So hopefully that'll work out even better. My name is Leslie Bruno. I'm with the Greater Richmond Chamber, and this is our Chamber Youth Program. It's monthly. Many of you have been here before. We just like to see you come back, and we also welcome our new folks too. Thank you for coming. We hope you found the 18th floor Bank of America Center okay. If anyone did park in a garage and need cash afterwards, there is a Bank of America ATM downstairs. Jim told me to say that.
If you bank with us, it's free.
Yes. So that's a perfect segue. I'm going to introduce Jim Lull, who's with Bank of America. They are our presenting and host sponsor this evening, and it's because of them that we're able to offer this program at low or no cost to you guys. So we're really appreciative of that partnership. And without further ado, Jim, say a few words.
And welcome everybody this evening. I hope you enjoy the wonderful view that we've got here. As Leslie said, my name is Jim Lull. I run the business banking division for the state of Virginia for Bank of America. And I do it quite often from this very floor, right around the corner over here. Although more often than that, I'm in my car traveling around the state, enjoying meeting with business owners across the state. Just want to say that the bank is thrilled to partner with the Chamber of Commerce in bringing you Chamber University. And as I looked at my calendar at the beginning of this week and saw that I was going to be making the opening remarks here, I went ahead and looked at the subject matter and saw that it's going to be about branding and controlling your voice and controlling how the market perceives your company. And I have to admit, I kind of chuckled and kind of got a little bit nervous because honestly, the last couple of few years, it's been a tough industry in banking to control one's voice and to control one's brand. It's been a very tough time to be in banking, in fact. And however, I do want to I want to mention and ask everybody: has anybody seen our new commercials that have been out recently? Anybody at all? Anyone notice them? Wow. I'll bet you will after I said this now. We actually did launch a rebranding initiative just 2 weeks ago. And so they're out there. You probably, I guess they just haven't, maybe you guys haven't been watching much TV lately, but we have started to show them we started during the Final Four basketball games and ongoing for the last couple of weeks. There's a real cool one with Benny, the big black dog. And I'm sure you'll like that one when you see it, and hopefully you'll remember it now that I've mentioned Benny, the big black dog. It's a pretty neat commercial, but nonetheless, at Bank of America, our tagline is that life's better when we're connected, and I think that probably everybody in this room agrees with that statement. When we're connected with our family, when we're connected with our friends, when we're connected at home and at work, and even when, life is even better when we're connected to our money. And so it's our initiative now to try to make it easier for everybody who banks with us to be connected with their money. So you'll see changes to our banking products and services coming in the immediate future with new mobile apps to make it easier to access your money, mobile banking for individuals on your phone, ATMs that actually have a face and that talk to you. When you go into the branches, a lot of the branches are being restyled so that when you go in, it's not your typical teller queue, but there's a sitting area where you can sit and wait to be called. And also, in many of our branches, we have mortgage loan officers, financial service officers who are ready and available to meet with you to take care of your needs. So I won't take up any more of your time. I know it's a great program ahead of you, and thank you very much for letting me speak.
So that's Benny the big black dog? Right? Okay, got it. I wonder what agency you used to do, just, you don't tell us.
We have our own,
Oh, do you?
I think.
All right, well, speaking of agencies, tonight's special guest speakers are Bayonet. They're a talented full-service branding agency located in Henrico. And they're here tonight. They're new chamber members, so we invite them to come down. We thought chamber you was a perfect fit. And they're going to talk to you about building a bulletproof brand and how that can help your bottom line. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Susan Howson, who is the executive producer at Bayonet, and Hunter Kinnear, who is the director of client strategy.
So, thank you very much for having us out this afternoon. First, I just want to say I don't do this a lot, so I apologize if I stumble. And the second part of this is I just got back from Vegas, which is probably going to make this way worse. So my apologies up front. My name is Hunter Kinnear. This is Susan Howson. We're the co-owners of Bayonet. We're a strategic branding agency located all the way out in Glen Allen. And a lot of times when we talk to people about what we do, they assume that we design the cute little logos that people put on their buildings and in their advertising. And in a way, that's true. We do that. We do a lot of brand identity work from a visual standpoint. But when we engage with clients, when we think about their brand, we like to look much deeper than that. We like to start with the personality of the business, with the essence of the business, and then kind of spread that out over how they talk to their consumers, how they talk to their internal audiences. We really try to build the brand from the inside of the business and work its way out into the community. So that we're being true to the brand and to the business overall. So do we do logos? Sure, we absolutely design logos, but we do a lot more than that. And really what it comes down to for us when we start to think about your brand is two things. The first one is impact. How can we make an impact with your brand? How can we make sure that people are remembering who you are, what you look like, what you sound like, what you act like when you're in the community? And the second one is gaining a competitive advantage. And that's where some of these things beyond logos really come into play. How is your brand creating some points of differentiation that you can own in your marketplace? How is it going to adjust with consumers over time as they evolve? Is it flexible enough to do that? What's your messaging look like? What's it sound like? How are you saying things differently than other brands in the market are saying them? And that's really where we wanted to focus today, rather than trying to get into branding as a whole, is the idea of brand voice and how you can create a strong brand voice to support your overall identity, and how you can use that as a point of differentiation as well. And Susan is our copy guru and is going to kind of focus on that brand voice and how you develop a strong brand voice over time.
I have two warnings about me. Number one, I have a terrible cold, so I'm going to try and project as much as possible. But no, this is not my normal personal brand voice. My normal voice is like a beautiful, melodious harp that would just entrance you. So it's kind of good, because otherwise I would just get too distracted. Secondly, when I was practicing this today, Hunter asked me if I did theater in high school, and it was a raised eyebrow. So I was basically called a theater kid when I was practicing this today. So I guess it's kind of for me or something. So yeah, brand voice. It's a super simple concept in this day and age. We're really used to huge national brands like Target and Starbucks, who become experts in setting themselves up, carbon copies of themselves all across America, and across the world, I imagine. And we've come to expect everything these brands to do to have a certain unique and feel in every aspect of their brand. You can swipe a Target credit card, you can shop with a Target shopping cart, and both of these items would be instantly recognizable to all of us with no problem, assuming you've been to a Target before. I don't know if you have not been to a Target before, I don't know if it's kind of weird, but
All right.
oh no. The shopping carts. I'm not going anywhere with this shopping carts.
Target's brand is strong.
carefully crafted and just as familiar to us, although I don't think too much about it, is the Target voice. If you were walking through a Target with your red Target cart, cruising by the $1 section, and thinking about whether or not you're looking for else the clothing, whether you're home goods, even the whole journey through the store is pretty, it's always the same. You saw a sign by Swimwear that said something like this. You bring your red shopping cart to a screeching halt because it's just not right. Like, it's just not Target. Does that scream not Target to anyone else but me?
Yeah.
Do you have any ideas for why it might not sound like Target? What about it jumps out at you? Yeah, they're not so, Target's just not frantic and enthusiastic like this. Yeah, they're calmer, they're fun, they're not spastic. They're a little bit more subtle, they like wordplay when they can do it. It helps them seem a little notch over retailers like Walmart who just have a little different tone. You probably would expect that Swimwear sign to look something more like this, right? A little bit more like that. I wrote that, so if you want to tell Target.